Hi, I'm just going to jump in quickly here and say, Jessie, I think we're good to go live if you'd like to make the welcoming introductory remarks. And Stephen, just a reminder, if you could put yourself on mute so we don't get your background noise. Over to you.
Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. My name is Jessie Yin. I am the Vice President of the Australian Chamber of Commerce, Singapore. On behalf of the Chamber, I want to thank our guests for joining us this morning. Welcome to our two-part series on Leading the Way in Digital Trade, Lessons for Global Trade from the Australia-Singapore Digital Economy Agreement, or DEA in short. Austcham Singapore is delighted to partner with Asia Society Australian, the Australian High Commission, and the Global Trade Professionals Alliance on these two events. The first part of the series was held last evening. Personally, it has been an interesting session listening to the panelists, where whilst it was focused on the policy aspect, there's clear reference from the panelists that policies can't work unless the businesses actively participate and provide feedback. A bit of takeaway from yesterday's session that I'd like to just mention briefly. Even prior to the current COVID situation, there's been efforts in promoting the use of digital in global trade, and this has allowed businesses, especially the smaller enterprises, in building up scale and business capacity. The COVID-19 situation has certainly pushed forth a faster adoption of digital trade, although it is still a long way to go. The three key elements in increasing digitalization lies in availability of infrastructure, which would include things like internet connectivity, availability of payment gateways, and logistics. These are elements, thankfully, are already there when one looks at promoting the use of digital trade between Australia and Singapore. However, same may not necessarily be there when one look at the less developed economies, including some within the region. Nonetheless, the agreement will set forth the way for future engagement in the rest of the region. Today, we'll look at some practical aspects and examine the opportunities and trends and explore how to capitalize on the benefits that the Digital Economy Agreement will bring. Before we hear from our panelists, let me quickly go through today's proceedings. The panel discussion will last for about 40 minutes, and you can submit your questions through the YouTube chat box, and we'll try to get through all of them. Webcast will end at 9:45 a.m. Singapore time. It is my pleasure now to introduce our speakers. You can find their full biography on our website. But briefly, Lisa McCauley will moderate today's session. She is the Executive Director of the Global Trade Professionals Alliance. Stephen Miller, who is President and Group Chief Executive of ST Telemedia. Alan Yang, the Regional Manager of Meat and Livestock Australia in Southeast Asia, as well as Greg Unsworth, the Risk and Assurance and Digital Business Leader for PwC Singapore. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jessie, and thank you to all the organisations that have invited me to moderate yesterday's session and today's. I tend to like to jump straight into the discussion because I know that you're not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from the experts that are all joining us online. Just a brief introduction in terms of the topic. One of the things that came up unexpectedly yesterday at the end of the session was a discussion around capacity building of businesses around e-commerce and digital trade and skills development. And the organizations that were online talked about the need to expand the opportunities for business to upskill in this area, which is why this session is probably very important to go through some of the areas that businesses should focus on, but also to discuss potentially how organizations can collaborate together to ensure that businesses are prepared for the future around e-commerce and digital trade. So I'm just going to quickly ask each of our panelists they've been introduced, but I'd like them to say in sort of one sentence what skills and capabilities they're bringing to today's discussion before I start the first question. Greg, to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, and good morning, everybody. First of all, just a little bit of background. So I've got a couple of key roles at PwC Singapore. One of those is leading our digital business initiatives across the firm. And when we look at that, it's looking at how we help clients navigate some of this complexity we see. Obviously, with the trade agreement being agreed, we're looking to eliminate some of that complexity. And when we look at it, we're looking at to see how companies can position themselves for future opportunities, manage some of the risks. And actually, we do have a very big focus on supporting upskilling for different organisations as well.
Thank you. And Stephen?
Good morning, everyone. Good to have this discussion following on yesterday. From SD Telemedia point of view, we've have our business focus in three areas. One is traditional telecom services. We have quite an expansive data center business in multiple countries across Asia. And then we have what we call infratech, which is B2B software enabled services. So DEA is right in our sweet spot, and we're looking at it for to increase the ease of doing business in multiple jurisdictions, the elimination of complexity, and also mutual recognition of standards and requirements that you don't have to replicate all your base activities and compliance, conformity, risk assurance, etc. So we see this as an important first step, for potentially a more regional framework that should enhance capabilities. In terms of resources, I think it's well recognized across different verticals that there isn't enough capacity at the moment, particularly in cyber. And so the more that we can align standards, align interoperability, that would actually take a lot of pressure off securing enough resources in order that we can enhance this capability.
Hi, Ellen, and you bring in your industry experience to the table from a very practical perspective.
Yes, exactly. I've lived in Singapore for about 6 years now. Previous to Meat and Livestock Australia, I worked for Treasury Wine Estates. So I've got a bit of experience in the wine industry and some of the challenges we faced, and now in the meat industry. So just bringing some really practical examples of how this DEA will really help business across the region.
Fantastic. So we've got some great experience on this panel today. So I'm going to start open to the first question. Greg, this will go to you first and then to Stephen. What are the opportunities for Australian and Singapore businesses in the digital area now?
Yeah, I think there are a number of opportunities. I mean, some of which are being explored regardless of the DEA agreement. But my sense is this helps move things forward. I think it's important to realise this is not an endpoint in itself. It facilitates a lot of discussion around new opportunity areas. A lot of those are encapsulated in the MOUs that have been agreed to look at specific areas for innovation and development. But if I look at the real here and now benefits and opportunities, there's a few focus areas that I see. One is, I think, just the ability to, at a governmental level, exchange more information, insights, enables the respective governance to be able to support different industry sectors in a more proactive way to drive more trade that's facilitated through digital mechanisms, and also to simplify that process. So I think just even the governmental cooperation enables a huge opportunity for growth. I think the other two key areas is we obviously have a lot of physical trade going on between the two countries, and we want to see that expand and grow. I think the ability to support the simplification of that through digital platforms, mechanism, sharing of data enables growth. And once again, the meat industry could be one. There's various other industry sectors that I suspect are well positioned to benefit. And probably the third one is around the digital economy from the perspective of not the non-physical side of things. So this is the development of content sharing, data-enabled platforms, things such as cloud computing, all of these areas that are going to be supported by simpler and consistent standards are very well poised to benefit.
Thank you. And Stephen, from your perspective, the opportunities in this area? Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Oh, there you go. I think one thing that's important in the agreement that doesn't get a lot of attention is what it actually specifically doesn't allow. So in the sense that, if you take source code, you're not required to provide source code. If you think about cross-border data transfer, you're not required necessarily to localize your data on the data transfer. So I think as much as enhancing in a positive way is important, and Greg gave a good summary, I think the clarity around what's not allowed is equally important, in that, if you're a bank, if you're an airline, if you're trying to develop an e-payments platform, then the clarity around some of these areas is very important. I think there is an initial indication around cybersecurity. I think that's an area that's a good start, but I think that one is actually going to be very critical in terms of mutual recognition of what's required on cybersecurity in order to enhance the confidence levels of developing the DEA cooperation areas.
Great, thank you. And Ellen, you come at this from a different perspective, because obviously you're talking about physical food.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
From your industry perspective, what does it mean? It means a little bit of a different thing.
It does, and I think what's exciting is we're going to see some really immediate opportunities, and it's as simple as no more paperwork. So, a lot of the exporters and farmers that send meat to Singapore at the moment have to do copious amounts of paperwork to get that product over here, and once it's done, it then has to go through processes where that paperwork's submitted, and it's a health certificate for that product. And if that's digital, there's going to be so much more opportunity to have speed to market, less human error. We're going to be seeing a lot of stock not being rejected because the paperwork was wrong and being sent all the way back to Australia, or product just being completely destroyed. So we're really excited to just see some of the immediate benefits. And with digitalisation, there's great opportunity as well to be able to just look at the process of how we are sending product into market, but then how do we potentially re-export that product as well? Because as soon as one box of meat gets opened with that health certificate, you're not allowed to then resend it anywhere else. So potentially, if this is digital, then we can send it from Singapore then to the rest of Southern Asia and use Singapore as a bit of a redistribution hub.
Incredible. I mean, we all well know that there's in some cases in shipments, you're talking thousands of pieces of paper in a container, and the delays that means at the border for compliance, and actually the physical costs, even just for compliance of paperwork, is staggering. So you get savings and efficiency as well.
Yeah, and I mean, even manpower and the amount of time that you don't have to spend doing that, staff costs, everything.
Yeah, it all adds up. Following on from that, we talked about the opportunities, but also alongside it, there are going to be challenges for Australian and Singapore businesses as they navigate this new digital space. So following just the same order, if that's okay, Greg, what do you think the biggest challenges are?
Yeah, I think the challenges don't all get corrected through one agreement. I think that's an important point to note. But I think these are obviously good steps in that direction and facilitate further work to be done. If I look at I suppose some of the challenges I see is one of the confidence part of this. Stephen talked a lot already about cybersecurity. I think where technology and digital platforms are not trusted from a security point of view, a data protection point of view, I think that slows down progress. I think building in the right confidence levels is really important. So confidence is key. I think the other one is convenience. And once again, Ellen had a very good example there where the process of transacting can be made a lot more convenient through digital platforms. And then I think probably the third part is just around the commerciality as well. I think this is going to allow new opportunities for cost savings for existing organisations just to process trade. But I do think it should stimulate more innovation. So overcoming that challenge of good ideas that people want to put into market, but it's difficult to do because you don't have common standards. We don't have people skilled up. We don't have the regulations to support innovation and things such as data sharing, which is going to be so important for new business models. there's some of the challenges I think that this will help with, and it'll be continued work in progress, I suspect.
Thanks. Stephen, from your perspective.
Yeah, I think there was a good amount of discussion yesterday on standards and standards development, standards recognition. So I won't sort of repeat that, but I think a very complex area in this is actually not the bright shiny box, but is there was a statement in the AI MOU, which was really making it a human-centered approach, and really think about the individual impact of a lot of the technology. So it's not. Actually, in a lot of these areas, the technology is not the limiting factor. It's basically that these agreements, these standards have got to catch up with the technology. And things like, when I say difficulty, if you look at the PDPA MOU, it's the longest MOU amongst all of them. And it's got a lot more provisions and definitions than if you look at data innovation or something like that. But that's necessary because it's amazingly complex. But that there's the prize, right? If we can get harmonization around PDPA, so that and the equivalence, that means if you're certified and compliant in one jurisdiction, you have confidence that you are equally recognized in the reciprocal jurisdiction. I think digital identity is another one where both sides are moving forwards on that. Both countries have got programs on that. And I think if we can get that right between on a bilateral basis, and I think Bruce pointed out yesterday, this per se is not limited to just Singapore and Australia. If we can add in other countries into the same framework, then you get the multiplier effect. And I think it's challenging to get those things right because it's governance and ethics, not technology. But the prize from doing so, I think, is tremendous.
Yeah, thank you. Ellen, what I'm going to do is ask you to sort of maybe raise any challenges that your industry specifically has, but then following on from that, if you can elaborate on a practical example of how this will help overcome those challenges for you.
Yeah, when you say the word challenges, I think that the opportunities far outweigh the challenges, just from a really simple and practical perspective for the immediate sort of opportunity that we have, which is just sending product without paperwork. So I think that Greg touched on it a little bit. It's about making sure that we've got all of our systems in place. So when the green light goes, we can actually become digital straight away. So we need to make sure that we've invested in the right digital platforms and worked to get the industry ready for when we can go digital, because that's sort of where we need to get our backyard right. And then once we've got that, it's very simple. We can just send product with an electronic digital signature and all of those sorts of things. So I don't see huge challenges. Stephen did touch on cross-border trade. That could be a few challenges there. With all of the different regulations around accepting product. So, standardization across the region would be a bit of a challenge. But at the moment, we're just looking at all the positives.
We need positivity this year. So
absolutely.
Discussion focused on the positivity and going into 2021. Greg, with the clients you've worked with at PwC and the work you do, any kind of sort of case studies, examples you can bring to the table?
Yeah, I think one thing which has really come to the fore, particularly in this environment with the pandemic and the major shifts we've seen in remote working and the challenges of organisations having to go digital in many ways as just to survive in the initial stages. I think one of the big challenges we see is for the smaller organisations. So if we look at it, the larger organisations, as Ellen said, have often already invested in the right digital technologies. In many cases, the capabilities. There's still obviously a lot more upskilling to do for all organisations and the economy as a whole and the population as a whole. But the SME sector we're finding is really challenged by the current environment, both from an economic point of view and also for those who are not well placed and haven't gone digital already, making those steps to go digital without having the resources, without having, from a financial point of view, but also skills and access to technology is one of the real challenges. So I think one example that I see, in fact, PwC's been heavily involved in, is working with, on the Singapore side of things, with the MAS. Other organisations such as IMDA is developing the Business Sans Borders platform. And what that aims to do is provide a platform that enables SMEs operating throughout the region to access procurement systems of larger organisations, facilitate easier trade, better information sharing, and enable that trade to be done where many of these organisations would really struggle to go cross-border otherwise. So I think that's one that we're still quite early into developing and fully, I suppose, making that optimised in terms of that platform at the moment, but it's moving along with a fair amount of momentum. And I think that's an example where that platform, together with the facilitation of the DEA agreement and other steps being taken from a government and regulatory point of view, should really facilitate and support SMEs to go regional and help to build their business and drive a lot more efficiency around different industry sectors.
Thanks. And I think that was something that came out very clearly yesterday. And again, to re-emphasize that it's SMEs that really are the backbone of most economies. And they're the sector that's been most hit by the crisis. And so anything that we can do to help support their economic recovery going forward, using e-commerce or using digital services as a way to expand their product offering or service offering is going to be really important. Stephen, I don't know if you have any practical examples you want to add.
Yeah, I don't want to be a naysayer on the SME side, but I think, from our telco perspective, we serve or we try to address SMEs, and they are phenomenally hard to encourage to digitalize, and particularly in this environment, changing your invoicing platform, getting hooked up, whatever else, is not necessarily their current priority. Their current priority is just to survive and whatever else. So I think I fully agree that the SME sector is something that, will benefit tremendously. But I think we've got to also accept that, it's got to be at a pace and in a context that they're willing to deal with. Because, often they will say there's next year I'll think about it. So I think we've got to, identify, but I think moderate our expectations about how quickly that's going to transform. Maybe if I take the other end of town, sort of the top end of town, I think there's a saying is, corporates, 5-year digital journeys just became a 2-year digital journey. And I think that, we're going to see that accelerate across the board. So digital transformation is a pretty wide sort of buzzword, not only in enterprises, but in governments as well. And I think the importance of something like DEA is critical, because when you're trying to architect or design what your new digital platform going to look like, what your business's processes are going to look like, what interfaces you need, the more we can get compatibility around DEA standards makes that job much easier. So you don't have to, be prepared for 10 blockchain standards. Maybe we can identify 2. We don't need, 6 payment platforms. We can focus on 1. So I think having the, something along the DEA process makes the design, the architecture and design of digital transformation processes much more simple and much more, I think it gives enterprises much more enthusiasm to adopt, because they actually know or have a much better idea what the end game is looking like when they're planning this out.
Thanks. And look, I could agree with you more on SMEs and the struggle to help them along this process. I think a lot of think that they will just suddenly, a lot of businesses, it's e-commerce is just the same as anything else. Well, actually, it's a totally different strategy and plan that you need to maybe put in place for e-commerce versus, other things. And I guess that's where governments might have to have an interventory role in terms of the type of support they can provide to that sector, the SME sector, to help them along with this process. But you touched on data standards and sharing, and that was where I was going next on what are the key components to success in this area. So Greg or Stephen, who wants to just pull that apart a bit further?
Yeah, Lisa, maybe happy to start with a few comments. I'm sure Stephen will add on to that. But I think from a data sharing point of view, I'm quite passionate about this area because I kind of feel there's this a little bit of tension we see around the whole issue of trying to maintain privacy of data, especially personal data. There's obviously regulations developed, for example, in Singapore and Australia to address some of those concerns. But my sense is if we can find a way to get confidence to be able to facilitate more data sharing, we see the efforts to do that at a governmental level already developing quite extensively. But I think if we can really develop that at a broader business level to a greater extent, that's going to facilitate a lot more benefits in terms of new business models, new services, and for the benefit of populations as well. Even if you look at something such as, that's very topical at the moment, such as healthcare, if we can develop ways to enable confidence around more anonymised data sharing amongst relevant organisations, governments and citizens, the ability to address health challenges will increase quite dramatically. So how do you do that? I mean, part of it is around the regulation that provides confidence. Partly it's also education around how data can and can't be used. I also think, there's a lot to be said for developing regulatory sandboxes that allows innovation within using data sharing in a more extensive way, in a managed, controlled way with a population set that you can enable a greater level of risk taking in the short term. So it's a big topic, but I think it's a really important one for more progress to be made on, I will call it safe data sharing to enable business and community benefits.
Thanks. Stephen, do you have any comments following on from that?
Yeah, I think this is a really tough area, particularly if you're a regulator. You're really being asked to balance. If you think about IMDA, I think the IMDA just added about 100 people because of the DEA. They seem to be responsible for a lot of this. But if you think about what a regulator is trying to do, they're trying to promote innovation around data usage and very similar to what we've got here. Very much also being held responsible for privacy standards and protection. And we've just seen Singapore enhance and beef up its PDPA requirements. Also, it cannot be an inhibitor on trade. Data localization is being promoted by some countries would mean their external trade would stop if you read it properly. And then there's the cyber standards that we talked about before. Now, if those are the objectives that regulators are being asked to address, some of those are not mutually compatible. So the question is, where's the balance and where's that capability is going to land out? So if I look at, say, Singapore, the PDPA Act revisions, I think, make a good balance between allowing more unauthorized, but not unauthorized, is not expressly consented use by corporations of the internal data of their customers. But at the same time, they've increased the penalties if you either breached or you inadvertently use that data for not sanctioned purposes. So I think, again, if, Australia's got a similar process. Again, the more that there is clarity around those sorts of elements, the easier it is for everybody to understand, and it's easier for then everybody to comply. So I think, if you look at the other areas, the March report on the Australia-Singapore digital trade standards, I think identify the supply chain involved and really distinguish between digital goods, physical goods, enablers, and the role that those play in that supply chain. I think augurs well for getting clarity and certainty as we go forward on some of this.
Thank you. Ellen, I'm going to turn to you now to look at the question of how can physical trade be driven or enabled by digital platforms?
Yeah, so I think just obvious examples are when we can send stock meat to Singapore, and it's all done through a digital platform, which is like a health certificate or even cash payments done electronically rather than you know, all of that sort of stuff. And then what we can do is look at how do we re-export that product to other regions if we can, and then, you know, or how do we create value-adding products as well once we've had it come into the region so quickly and easily. So I think it's all about that speed to market and opportunities to on-sell, and, you know, just without stock being rejected or any, you know, of those sort of challenges that we're currently facing. A bit of an example is just say a hotel chain like Accor or the Hilton. They have, you know, hotels all over Southern Asia, and they might want to do one purchasing model rather than lots of different purchasing. And they might have one exporter from Australia that they're getting their meat from. And a sustainable way to purchase meat is to actually buy it in bulk rather than, you know, packs and things like that. So if you buy a full carcass as a hotel would, they'd bring it into Singapore through a digital health certificate. They could then break down that carcass and then rework it and send it on to all of their hotel chains across the region. That's you know, blue skies. That's where we want to see the model go. But yeah, I think digitalisation will help that, and it will just make business and sending product so much easier, but also be more sustainable.
Can I follow up then on that with Ellen then, from your perspective? You must have been quite excited as an industry around the signing of RCEP then, because if you're looking at a regional strategy here, the combination of this agreement and then the plus side of looking at RCEP and TPP for you guys must be exciting.
Yeah, exactly, because it goes beyond just FTAs. It looks at how do we standardise things and make it more consistent across the region. You know, I find it quite difficult understanding all of the different standards in each region, and I don't know how our exporters must feel when they need to send stock to Thailand or to Vietnam and even Malaysia. It's all very different, and so if we start to have more of this regional approach in ASEAN, it can only help our industry be able to sell their product more easily, but also all the businesses in Southern Asia will know how to purchase product and build better relationships with their exporters and the brands that they want to represent in the region.
Yeah, it is. Again, you're saying looking towards positivities. This week has not been too bad with the announcement of RCEP, as well as we look to forming such a regional trading agreement. Greg, Stephen, do you have?
Sorry, Lisa, you've just gone on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah, Lisa, I didn't hear that. Yeah.
You can't read my lips. Did you have any comments too on the physical side of trade through digital?
I don't probably specifically had a lot to add, because I thought the examples used by Ellen were quite demonstrative. I think, you know, it gives some really good practical examples. I do think it once again just comes down to having confidence in the platforms, having the knowledge and ability to use those, and the convenience of using platforms. I think all of this, in terms of the provisions within the DEA and the MOUs, all will have a positive effect in terms of enabling the ease of more physical trade through digital platforms.
Great. And Stephen, do you have anything to add to that?
I defer to Ellen in this area. It's hers. I think the other observation I would make as we move down this process is the question of enforcement, and enforcement, whether that's physical goods or digital goods. So if there's a breach, which entity can then enforce the action against whoever's done the breach, and will that be recognized cross-border? So for example, if Bank A transfers data to the other jurisdiction and there is a breach in the other jurisdiction, then defining which government entity has the primary focus around investigating and then potentially enforcing that area. So I think as we go through these next stage MOUs on data and innovation, PDPA, and whatever else, I think the question of enforcement and remedies is something that's going to have to be picked up. And I think that applies whether it's a digital good or a physical good or a service.
Well, you raise an interesting point too, in terms of the role of customs here as well, in terms of and customs acceptance of digital documentation. I sat on the WCO e-commerce committee for a couple of years, where we were discussing whether we still needed 133 data points on an e-commerce parcel, which does not make any sense. But, you know, Ellen, that, if, you know, customs enforcement here, when you're looking at moving things sort of in a digital way, is a big factor for your sector. Yeah, absolutely. I've heard some horror stories about products just not being cleared through customs because of just a human error on you know, filling in a wrong barcode or something like that. And, you know, it's such a waste. And for us, that's completely against everything we believe in our Australian, you know, meat industry. It's all about sustainability and sharing our product. And, you know, it's heartbreaking to hear these stories of product being destroyed or being rejected. So that leads, I mean, we discussed this a bit yesterday. Someone brought up the need for a trade facilitation agreement plus that goes a little bit further towards nudging authorities to accept digital documentation from a trade facilitation perspective. And yeah, too. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's it doesn't take that much to just have a electronic version of what we're currently using with e-signatures, where you can just also track where the stock is along the way. So that really helps with traceability as well, if that form is digital. And you can see where it is in the chain of who needs to sign it and where if it's been accepted yet or not. So it gives our exporters a lot more visibility of where their product is and if it's been gone into the customer yet or not, or if it's still sitting, you know, in customs, and what do they need to do to ensure that it gets through. Well, that raises, I'm a little off tangent, but the next question was about the role of cross-border and trade facilitation a bit. But it raises the point on this issue of actually digital trade and its role in looking at supply chain security and enforceability, particularly actually in the wake of the pandemic, because we have seen certain countries take advantage of PPE, you know, so I don't know if you, Greg or Stephen, want to comment on the fact that actually the role of adopting digital technology in supply chains actually is going to be quite important going forward for a number of reasons.
I think that's definitely correct, and I think what what a lot of people using diverse supply chains have worked out is you can be overly reliant on that supply chain, and that if you have a single point of supply and it's not available to you, you know, then what? And so I think the other element that unfortunately takes up a lot of people's time if you're also using supply chains is, you know, you need to make sure that you're compliant with your internal policies, but also external policies. So that the more that you can digitalize that process, the more that you can get e-certification that your supplier and countrywide is maintaining, upholding, you know, ethical labor laws, OHS type capabilities. And the more that you can do that digitally, you know, it gives you reassurance that, you know, your supply chain is robust, is verifiable. And then, you know, again, you need that sort of capability if you're going to use multiple supply chains from a diversification point of view. So the more you can do that sort of capability digitally rather than physically, obviously makes a big difference to your compliance and maintaining your internal standards.
Absolutely. Greg, I think you had something to say on this too.
Yeah, actually, I'll just build on that, and maybe kind of looking at it from a broader point of view as well. So I think the points that Stephen made there about having a resilient, hopefully digitally enabled supply chain and options and flexibility there is going to be so important for, once again, confidence in the systems and the ability to successfully trade cross-border. And it's going to be so important. I guess the point I just wanted to make was, you know, the discussion at the moment, we're very focused on the Singapore-Australia trade. We're also talked a little bit about the regional perspective with the agreement signed this week as well. I think one interesting dynamic is, what do global supply chains look like in future as well? We have, obviously, China has come into the RCEP agreement. And then we've got the complexity of the China versus US tensions that we see, and obviously the current political dynamics being played out in the US. So I think one question organisations will need to look at is, to what extent do they need to pivot in terms of their focus on who they're doing trade with and who that trade is supported with through different supply chains. And it will be interesting to see where the US moves over the next 2 to 3 years when we think about it from a more global point of view around supply chains and trade as well.
Yeah, very good point. I'm actually doing a project with this at the moment, and I'll share some of the survey results that we've been doing with DFAT on it soon. So just from a timing perspective, bit off topic, but to the businesses that are online, could each of you give one big tip that you think should be their key takeaway from your perspective today on this topic? 1 or 2 top 10 tips for them. I'll do the same order that I've been doing. It's easier. Greg.
Okay. What about, I'll jump in first. It's always good to go first so you have more options. But I think it's probably the first thing that was raised during the conversation today, and that was around the importance of upskilling. So I think one of the most important things to do is make sure that your organisation and the key people know what the options are available and are skilled to put in place and take advantage of some of the technology platforms, the options, and also understand the regulations to make sure that they optimise the opportunities for the business, but also manage the risks and stay on the right side of the regulations as well. So it's education and upskilling.
Great. Stephen?
Yeah, it's not particularly insightful, but I think that one of the themes from yesterday that came out at the end was be involved, because one of the things that's quite impressive, out of both the agreement but also the MOU is the amount of different government departments that are involved on both sides of the equation. So out of Australia, you got the Digital Transformation Agency, Industry, Science, Energy Resources, Home Affairs, ATO, Agricultural Water, the Australian Information Commissioner. Out of Singapore, IMDA, Smart Nation, Digital Governments, and Customs, the Food Agency, the PDPA Commissioner. So I think what businesses have got to understand is government is really going all in on this. And if you look at the scope of the MOUs, is very ambitious. So, standards will be set, precedent will be determined. And so I think enterprises, government agencies, medium-sized businesses really need to be involved, because it would be a waste to give up this opportunity to help shape those requirements, and not being involved and then complaining about the standards that emerge is a wasted position. So I think enterprises got to understand that this is a really good opportunity, and the involvement and the participation from companies is critical. And on some of these very contentious areas, cyber, PDPA, digital standards, digital identity, they're not necessarily easy subjects, but they're important for everybody to contribute to.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. Ellen, anything from your side?
From my side, I'd probably look at how I would influence the Australian sort of meat industry around sort of alerting them that Southern Asia is where it's at. It's an exciting opportunity now that all of these great agreements are happening with the DEA and the signing and the RCEP. It's really an exciting opportunity for our industry to look at Southern Asia, look at the consumers and how much they're really seeking Australian product at the moment, and maybe taking some of your focus away from other regions that we're struggling to trade with at the moment, and potentially really put more emphasis into Southern Asia and look at the opportunities that are here.
Well, in my previous role, I always told exporters to not always put their eggs in one basket and to have make sure that they have diverse export markets, because if one market goes down and it's out of your control, it takes a long time to build up relationships in new markets, and it doesn't happen overnight. So on that, I got a question that people are interested in is, and then I'm conscious of the timing, but could each of you, someone wants to know, how do your organizations, how do you help them? How do you work with businesses, just so that they know where they go to for advice or support? Ellen, do you want to go first? Or reverse this time?
Yeah, not a problem. So a bit about Meat and Livestock Australia. We're obviously an industry body. We're funded by levy payers. So we're government audited, but we're supported by people who are selling and exporting beef. So for us, we really look at market access in the region, and we help all of our industry by alleviating any NTBs and things like that, working closely with the government around FTAs. We also provide our industry with insights. So I do a lot of work with consumer insights in the region around what Southern Asian consumers are preferring to eat, and how do we sort of look at the product that we're currently sending and how to localize it and how to make it relevant for the Southern Asia consumer. And then finally, we help our industry by brand Australia. So how do we, creating that true Aussie beef and lamb, and really sort of doing a lot of promotions, PR, events, and that type of thing, social, digital sort of promotions and executions.
Thank you. Stephen.
I guess we're, ST Telemedia, we sort of are the corporation that's, directly involved in this. I think maybe if I can take a slightly different tact on this question, I think the other one that will be interesting as part of this is how does these sorts of agreements then link with Foreign Investment Review Board. And so there are some challenges at the moment, again on sort of recognition of MFN type status between, and so some areas for investment I think are going to change quite substantially. So for example, if you think about the move to the cloud and things like that, from our capability set point of view, if we have, we don't actually need a physical office now in other jurisdictions, we can do most of that cloud transformation work from Singapore. So we've had projects in fairly substantial projects in different countries. And I think that, unless, so I guess what I'm saying is, unless the FIRB type regulations, the foreign investment type regulations also keep up with DEA requirements, that's also going to lag in this process. So we have to be very careful about, when we think about investing in different countries, again, with a lot of these compliance and other areas. And I would like that to be a little bit more recognized and a little easier to navigate as well.
Yeah, very, very good. Great.
Yeah, so obviously PwC, I think a lot of the participants would be reasonably familiar with PwC, but I think I'd stress, we're a very broad-based professional services firm. A lot of people think of us as an audit and tax firm, which we are, we do that. But I think what we've done a lot over the last 2 or 3 years in particular is invest very significantly in our capabilities around the digital agenda and helping our clients. It's really important to note that we've gone through our own transformation quite fundamentally. We've got 3,500 professionals here in PwC Singapore. Every single one of them has been through a digital upskilling program, and we're continuing to invest a lot in that. And partly our aim is to change the way that we operate as a firm and make all the right changes for the future. But also we want to take that learning and help companies. And how do we help companies? We want to help them we want to help them grow. We want to help them be successful. And really importantly, we want to help them manage the various risks that they face, particularly in this digital environment as well. So I guess the invitation would be, if there's any thoughts in terms of your business, feel free to reach out to us, and we're always happy to see how we can help.
Well, you guys have come up with Game of Trade, which I think is a really, really cool educational tool on free trade agreements. So I have to say, I think
Yeah, we like that one.
I do, but then I'm a trade geek, so I definitely like it. I'm going to say thank you so much to all of you today for sharing your expertise. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. Again, I apologise we've gone slightly over. It's really hard to cover so much in such a short time. So thank you so much for your participation as expert panel members, and thank you everyone for staying online. And I'm going to now hand it over to Jessie to do the final closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists and also the moderator for this very interesting discussion. If I could summarize, e-commerce and digital trade is definitely here to stay. The DEA has set the framework for common standards to reduce barriers and build an environment in which Australian and Singapore businesses and consumers are able to participate and benefit from digital trade. The framework would help to facilitate businesses, especially the smaller business, which otherwise may have difficulties in building scale or face challenges in going cross-border. Other benefits that our panelists have talked about, including reducing human errors and hence impacting speed to market. We also talk a bit about facilitating supply chain, which is evolving in this current world, whether it's because of COVID or the geopolitics, right? And that's where digital trade would actually come in and help a lot on that. Our panelists have also pointed a few more aspects to focus on, including data protection, role of customs in facilitating digital trade. There's also the mention of, and also learning from yesterday's session, the number of government agencies that has been involved, right, in getting the DA signed. And this shows that there's a lot of commitment and interest in getting this right. So to the words of my conclusion from what the panelists have said is really to make sure that we know and be educated in what the framework brings about, and also be involved and be engaged with the agency. So with that, I want to thank you again very much to our partners and to all our viewers and listeners for joining us. Please do stay tuned, as there will be other Austcham events that's going to come up before the Christmas break. Thank you very much again, and have a good weekend ahead.
Thanks, Jessie. Thanks, Lisa. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good day ahead.
Cheers.